A starving little girl dares to knock on the gates of a millionaire's mansion. She asks for nothing but leftovers, and in return, she promises him a miracle. He laughs in her face, but what happens next will leave you speechless. This is a story you won't forget. Welcome to Brainfuel, the channel where ordinary moments spark extraordinary lessons. Here, we bring you powerful, emotional stories that will inspire your heart, fuel your mind, and remind you of the miracles hidden in everyday life. Subscribe now and let's grow together. Please, sir, just a little food. Those words, so soft they could almost be mistaken for the rustle of leaves in the wind, were spoken by a young girl named Amara. She stood trembling at the gates of a mansion that towered above her like a castle from another world. The mansion belonged to Henry Wallace, a man whose wealth was the talk of the entire city. His businesses had made him a millionaire, but tragedy had made him something else entirely, a prisoner in his own body. A car accident years ago had left him paralyzed from the waist down. He now lived in that grand home, confined to a wheelchair, surrounded by luxury yet consumed by loneliness and bitterness. Amara, in sharp contrast, had nothing. She was small, her frame thin from hunger, and her dress hung off her body like a piece of cloth more suited for rags and clothing. Her feet were bare, cracked from walking long distances on hot pavements. Her face carried dirt from days of living without shelter, but her eyes, large, dark, and filled with a strange kind of strength, shone like lanterns in the night. She had no money, no family, no home, and on that day, her stomach had been empty for so long that the pain felt like fire twisting inside her. She had wandered the streets in search of food, begging strangers for crumbs, only to be pushed away again and again. When she reached Henry's mansion, she almost turned back. The gates were tall, the walls spotless white, guarded by cameras and steel. It looked like the kind of place that had never known hunger, never tasted suffering. But her desperation forced her feet to stay planted, and so she gathered every ounce of courage left inside her tiny body and called out, "Please, sir, just a little food." Her voice carried across the yard, reaching Henry, who was sitting in his living room by the large window. He turned his head, irritated. He disliked disturbances. He had built his fortune on control and order, and his life, though bitter, was structured, predictable. A stranger's cry for help did not belong in his world. "Who is that?" Henry barked, his voice harsh. A butler rushed forward, peeking through the gates. "Sir, it's a young girl. She appears to be homeless." Henry wheeled himself closer, his sharp eyes locking on Amara. He scanned her from head to toe, taking in her torn dress, her dirty skin, her trembling hands. "And what does she want?" he asked coldly. "She's asking for food, sir," the butler said gently, almost ashamed to deliver the message. Henry chuckled, a sound that carried no warmth. "Food? From me?" He tilted his head, amusement flickering in his eyes. What makes her think she can beg from Henry Wallace, of all people? The butler hesitated, unsure how to answer, but before he could speak, Amara raised her voice again. "Please, sir, just the leftovers. I don't need much. Anything you were going to throw away, please." The millionaire's laughter boomed this time, echoing across the courtyard. "Leftovers? My scraps." He found the thought almost entertaining. For years, people had come to him asking for loans, business opportunities, or donations for charities. They all came dressed in suits, speaking with polished words. Yet here stood a little girl, barefoot and dirty, asking not for money but for what he considered trash. And then she said something that caught him completely off guard. "In return, I'll give you a miracle." The world seemed to pause for a moment. The staff by the gates froze, their eyes wide. Henry leaned forward, narrowing his gaze. "What did you just say?" "A miracle," Amara repeated, her voice steady despite the fear pounding in her chest. "If you trade your leftovers with me, I will give you a miracle." Henry's lips curled into a cruel smile. A miracle? The word felt like a joke. He, a man who had everything money could buy, knew better than to believe in such foolish things. His legs, stiff and unresponsive beneath his blanket, reminded him daily that miracles did not exist. Still, Something about the way she said it unsettled him. Her voice didn't tremble the way most beggars did. Her eyes didn't carry desperation alone. They carried certainty, as if she truly believed in what she promised. Miracle, you say? Henry mocked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. What miracle could little street rat like you possibly offer me? Will you make me walk again? He laughed loudly, shaking his head. No, child, you've chosen the wrong man to trick. But Amara didn't back down. She took a small step forward, gripping the rusty bars of the gate with her tiny fingers. Her dark eyes locked onto his, and for the first time in years, someone looked at Henry Wallace not with pity, not with greed, but with a strange kind of faith. Yes, she whispered, I can't heal your legs, but I can give you a miracle greater than walking. Henry raised a brow, curiosity prickling at the edge of his skepticism. Greater than walking? Yes, Amara said, her voice soft but unshaken. A miracle that will make your heart live again. The air grew heavy, as if the entire world was waiting for Henry's response. For a moment, even the birds on the mansion's rooftop seemed to go quiet. Henry laughed again, though this time it sounded less sure, almost forced. Child, you speak nonsense. But fine, if you want my leftovers, take them. Let's see what miracle you bring me in return. The staff hurried inside to fetch the food. Amara, exhausted yet triumphant, sank to the ground outside the gates, tears of relief streaming down her face. Inside the mansion, Henry turned his wheelchair back toward the window. He told himself it was just a silly distraction, just another beggar's game. And yet, something about that girl's words stayed with him, echoing in his mind long after the laughter had faded. A miracle greater than walking, a miracle that will make your heart live again. For the first time in years, Henry Wallace didn't feel in control. He felt curious. Henry Wallace had always been a man who laughed at the idea of hope. Before his accident, his laughter had been a sound of confidence, a man sure of his wealth, power, and control. But now, in his paralyzed state, his laugh had changed. It was sharper, emptier, tinged with bitterness. So when Amara, the frail little girl with dirt on her face and fire in her eyes, promised him a miracle in exchange for leftover food, his first reaction was to laugh. Not the laugh of amusement, but the laugh of a man mocking the very idea of miracles. You'll give me a miracle, will you? Henry said, shaking his head. Look at me, child. Do you see these legs? He slapped the blanket, covering his lifeless limbs. They're dead. Gone. Doctors worth millions couldn't fix them. Surgeons, specialists, the best money could buy, none of them could make me walk again. And yet you, with no shoes on your feet, promised me a miracle? His words were sharp. Each syllable meant a slice, through whatever dignity Amara still held. The staff at the gate shifted uncomfortably. They had seen Henry dismiss people before, but there was something cruel about the way he mocked this girl. But Amara didn't look away. Her tiny hands gripped the cold iron bars of the gate, her knuckles pale. She blinked, steadying herself, and then answered softly, Sir, maybe your legs won't walk again, but your heart can. The words hung in the air like smoke, drifting into Henry's mind whether he wanted them there or not. He smirked, but the smirk faltered just slightly. Big words for a hungry child, he muttered, trying to dismiss her. Yet, deep down, a part of him felt unsettled. The butler, an older man who had served Henry for years, dared to speak. Sir, perhaps we should just give her something to eat. It costs us nothing. Henry turned his gaze on him sharply. I'm not running a charity, Charles. This is my home, not a soup kitchen. But then he looked back at Amara, and something in her expression, some strange, unshakable faith, nudged him in a way he hadn't felt in years. He sighed dramatically and waved his hand. Fine, give her the scraps. Let's see this miracle she speaks of. The servants quickly gathered a tray of food, pieces of bread, leftover stew, fruit that would have gone into the trash by nightfall. They carried it out to her. When Amara saw the tray, her eyes lit up. She thanked them softly, almost reverently, and ate with the hunger of someone who hadn't tasted food in days. She didn't gobble it down carelessly. Instead, she savored each bite, tears slipping down her cheeks, not from the taste, but from relief. Henry watched through the window, his arms crossed. To him, food was nothing but a daily routine. To her, it was salvation. The sight made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't explain. When she finished eating, Amara didn't rush away like most beggars would. Instead, she stood, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and slowly walked closer to the gate again. She reached her small hand through the bars and gently touched Henry's arm where he sat in his chair. The touch startled him. For years, he had lived untouched, isolated, even feared. But this girl, with nothing to her name, touched him without hesitation. Her voice was quiet but steady. The miracle isn't in walking, Mr. Wallace. The miracle is in seeing the good you still have inside you. Henry froze. No one had spoken to him like that in years. People usually flattered him, feared him, or avoided him altogether. But this little girl, this nobody, dared to tell him he had good inside him, something he himself had long stopped believing. He pulled his arm back sharply and forced a laugh, though it sounded strained. That's your miracle? Words. He scoffed. Child, words can't change anything. Words won't make me walk. Words won't make me whole again. Amara's eyes softened. Sometimes words are the only miracles people need, she said. Her calmness rattled him. He expected her to beg, to cry, to plead for more food or money. Instead, she gave him something he didn't know how to handle. Hope. Go on, then. Henry snapped, though not as harshly as before. Take your miracle talk somewhere else. I've had enough nonsense for one day. But as Amara walked away with her small bundle of leftovers, Henry couldn't tear his eyes from her. Something inside him, something long buried, stirred awake. That night, as the mansion grew quiet and the city lights glowed in the distance, Henry lay awake in his bed. Sleep wouldn't come. He kept hearing her words, echoing in the silence of his empty home. The miracle isn't in walking, the miracle is in seeing the good you still have inside you. For the first time in years, he felt restless, not because of pain in his body, but because of a strange ache in his heart. Henry Wallace woke the next morning with an unusual heaviness on his mind. It wasn't the weight of his body. He was used to the immobility of his legs by now. No, it was something far stranger, something he couldn't quite name. It was the voice of a little girl echoing in his memory. The miracle isn't in walking. The miracle is in seeing the good you still have inside you. He tried to shake it off as nonsense. What could a barefoot child possibly know about miracles? She had no idea what it felt like to lose everything that defined you. She had no idea what it meant to be trapped in your own body. But still, her words clung to him like a stubborn shadow. Henry rolled his wheelchair toward the window that overlooked his front gates. From there, he often watched the world outside, while refusing to be part of it. The city was alive beyond his walls. Cars rushing, people walking, life moving. He told himself he didn't need any of it. Yet now, for the first time, he found himself searching the street, scanning the sidewalks for a glimpse of that girl. And there she was. Amara stood just outside the gates again, but this time she wasn't begging. In her small hand, she carried a bundle of wildflowers. Tiny, uneven, and a little wilted, but arranged with such care that they almost looked like a bouquet. She wasn't shouting, wasn't pleading. Instead, she was softly humming a tune, her voice light and delicate, like the whisper of wind on a calm day. Henry frowned, confused. Why would she come back? He muttered. I gave her food. She should have run off to the next place. Yet something in her persistence tugged at him, against his better judgment. He ordered the gate opened. Bring her inside, he told Charles, the butler. The old servant hesitated. Sir, do you think that's wise? She's just a child. I said bring her in. Henry interrupted, his tone firm but not cruel this time. A few minutes later, Amara stood in the grand hallway of Henry's mansion. Her bare feet made no sound on the polished marble floor, and her wide eyes darted around at the chandeliers, paintings, and golden railings. To a girl who had known only hunger and dust, the mansion looked like another world entirely. Henry studied her carefully. Why did you come back? He asked, his voice carrying more curiosity than anger. Amara looked at him, her expression calm. Because miracles don't happen in one day. Henry raised an eyebrow. Still with this miracle nonsense, are you? She nodded, holding out the bundle of flowers. I brought these for you. He blinked in surprise. No one had brought him a gift in years. People brought him reports, contracts, expensive wines, but not simple, thoughtful gifts. He stared at the crooked bouquet, unsure how to react. Flowers, he said flatly. They aren't much, Amara admitted, but they're alive. They grow even in broken places, just like people can. Her words hit Henry in a place he had long sealed off. He looked at the flowers again, then quickly turned his gaze away, unwilling to show emotion. Humph. Do you think cheap weeds will make me happy? Amara tilted her head. I think maybe you don't remember what happiness feels like. These flowers can remind you. The butler, standing silently nearby, almost gasped. No one spoke to Henry that way, but instead of exploding in anger, Henry gave a small, strange chuckle. You're bold, I'll give you that. Not bold, Amara replied softly. Just honest. Henry's amusement faded, replaced with something he hadn't felt in years. Interest. He waved his hand toward the dining room. Fine. Sit. If you insist on bringing me weeds and talking about miracles, at least do it while you eat. A meal was set for her, far more than she could ever eat in one sitting. Amara's eyes widened, but she whispered a quiet prayer of thanks before touching the food. She ate slowly, respectfully, as if she didn't want to appear greedy. Henry watched her carefully, his mind restless. Why didn't she beg for money? Why didn't she demand more food or clothes? Why waste her time with him, a bitter old cripple who had nothing to offer her but mockery? When she finished, she folded her hands neatly and looked at him. Do you know why I keep coming back? She asked. Henry leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. Enlighten me. Because you don't really want to be alone, she said simply. You think you do. You tell yourself you don't need anyone, but your eyes tell me otherwise. Henry froze. For a moment, he had no words. No one had ever spoken to him with such piercing honesty. People either tiptoed around him or used him for his money. This little girl, however, saw straight through him as if he were made of glass. He broke the silence with a scoff. Child, you know nothing about me. Amara just smiled. Maybe, but I know enough. And I know miracles take time. So I'll keep coming back. And with that, she stood, thanked him again, and quietly left. Henry sat in his chair long after she was gone, the scent of wildflowers lingering in the air. He told himself it was foolishness, that she was just a naive child clinging to fairy tales. But deep inside, a small crack had formed in the thick wall of bitterness he had built around his heart. For the first time in many years, Henry Wallace didn't feel quite so alone. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Henry Wallace had known in years. His mansion, once cold and lifeless, began to feel different. It wasn't because of the paintings or the gold trimmings or the chandeliers overhead. He had lived with those for decades, and they had never brought him joy. No, the difference came in the form of a barefoot girl who refused to treat him as the world did, with pity or fear. Amara started visiting regularly. Sometimes she came with flowers, sometimes with little songs she made up, and other times with nothing at all, just herself and her quiet smile. In return, Henry gave her food, clothes, and once even a pair of small shoes that had been ordered online in secret by his butler. But what Amara treasured most wasn't the food or the gifts. It was the time she spent talking with him. For Henry, this was strange territory. People usually came to him only for business, money, or favors. Even his closest employees rarely spoke to him beyond polite necessity. But Amara, she didn't want anything. She didn't even talk about his wealth. She talked about life, about little things. The colors in the sunset, the shape of clouds, the silly way sparrows hopped instead of walked. At first, Henry found it childish. But slowly, he found himself waiting for her visits. He caught himself listening more closely than he had in years, even smiling at her little stories. His staff noticed a change, too. Their once bitter, impatient master was now quieter, sometimes even chuckling at the girl's words. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky orange, Amara arrived carrying a small tin filled with soil. It was a tiny green sprout, fragile but alive. "What's this?" Henry asked, puzzled. "A seed I planted," she said proudly. "I thought maybe we could grow it together." Henry scoffed. "I'm no gardener." "You don't have to be," Amar replied, setting the littlekin by the window where the sun could reach it. "You just have to give it light and water. The rest takes care of itself." Henry stared at the sprout long after she left that evening. Something about it unsettled him. He couldn't explain why. Maybe it was because the little plant reminded him of himself, fragile, bent by circumstances, but still alive. As the days passed, Henry noticed subtle changes. He began wheeling himself to the window more often, checking on the sprout's progress. He even remembered to water it, something he hadn't done for anything in years. And each time Amara came, she asked about it first, smiling whenever she saw it grow taller. It was during one of these visits that Henry finally voiced a question that had been burning inside him. "Amara," he said, his voice quieter than usual, "why do you keep calling this whatever is happening here a miracle? Look at me. I'm still in this chair. My legs are as useless as ever. Nothing has changed." Amara looked at him with her calm, steady eyes. She walked closer and gently placed her small hand on his arm, just as she had the first time. "You're wrong, Mr. Wallace," she said softly. "Everything has changed." Henry frowned. "How so?" "Before," Amara explained, "you were alive but not really living. You sat in this big house, surrounded by gold and glass, but inside, you were empty. You had walls taller than these gates built around your heart. No one could reach you." She paused, her voice firm but kind. "But now you laugh sometimes. You notice flowers and sunsets. You take care of this little sprout. You talk to me. That's living, Mr. Wallace. That's your miracle." Her words struck Henry harder than he expected. He had spent so many years convincing himself that life was meaningless without the use of his legs. He had measured his worth by what he could no longer do. But this girl, with nothing but hope in her pockets, was telling him he still had value. He still had life. He felt a tightness in his throat, something he hadn't felt in years. His eyes stung, and to his own surprise, tears began to form. He quickly turned his face away, embarrassed. "You don't understand," he whispered. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything." Amara shook her head. "You didn't lose everything. You just forgot to see what you still have. You still have your mind, your voice, your heart, and now you have me." Henry couldn't respond. The words broke through the last piece of bitterness he had clung to. His chest trembled, and for the first time in many, many years, Henry Wallace cried openly, not out of anger or pain, but out of gratitude. That evening, as the sky darkened and Amara prepared to leave, she turned back at the door and smiled. "See? You traded your leftovers for a miracle. You just didn't know what kind of miracle it would be." Henry sat in silence long after she was gone, staring at the little sprout on the windowsill. For the first time, he believed her. The miracle wasn't in walking. The miracle was in living again. The change in Henry Wallace did not happen in a single night, but it grew slowly, like the tiny sprout on his windowsill. Day after day, Amara's presence chipped away at the bitterness he had built around himself. And little by little, the world began to notice. Henry's mansion, once known for its silence and strict gates, became a place of small laughter, of footsteps, of life. The servants, who had spent years tiptoeing around their grumpy master, started smiling more often too. They whispered to each other about the little girl who had somehow done what no doctor, no amount of money, and no friend had ever managed. She had brought Henry Wallace back to life. But the change wasn't just within the mansion. One morning, Henry asked his butler to wheel him outside, a request so unusual that Charles nearly dropped the tray he was holding. "Outside, sir?" he asked, stunned. "Yes," Henry said firmly. "It's about time I saw the world again. I've been hiding long enough." And so, for the first time in years, Henry rolled through the iron gates of his own mansion, with Amara skipping beside him. People in the neighborhood froze. Some whispered in shock. Others smiled in disbelief. The paralyzed millionaire who had become a recluse was out in the open, and not only that, he was smiling. From that day forward, Henry's life took on a new purpose. He began asking questions he hadn't asked in years. What can I do? Who can I help? How can I give back? The answer was right in front of him. Amara. She had lived her whole life in poverty, her brilliance and courage overlooked simply because she had no one to guide her. Henry decided that would change. He arranged for her to attend a good school, providing her with books, uniforms, and everything she needed. When she protested, saying she didn't want to take advantage of him, Henry only smiled and said, "You didn't take advantage of me, Amara. You gave me back my life. This is just me keeping my end of the trade." But Henry didn't stop with Amara. Her story had opened his eyes to the reality of so many other children just like her, hungry, cold, and forgotten. He began funding programs to provide free meals for children in the city. He established scholarships, built community centers, and even created a foundation in Amara's name, the Miracle Foundation. Its mission was simple: to remind people that kindness could change lives. News spread quickly. Reporters wrote about the transformation of the bitter old millionaire. Paralyzed tycoon turned philanthropist. The headlines read. People who once whispered about Henry's cruelty now spoke of his generosity. But when asked about his sudden change of heart, Henry always gave the same answer. I traded leftovers for a miracle. Meanwhile, Amara's own life blossomed. From a thin, hungry girl who once begged outside the gates of a mansion, she grew into a confident young student. She worked hard, inspired by Henry's faith in her. She often returned to the mansion after school, sharing what she learned, reading books aloud to Henry, and teaching him little things about the world he had forgotten. Their bond grew deeper, like a grandfather and granddaughter, though tied not by blood but by something stronger, love and gratitude. Henry often found himself reflecting on the irony of it all. For years, he had believed his life was over when he lost the use of his legs. He had thought wealth without movement was nothing. Yet this little girl had shown him that true wealth wasn't in what he had lost, but in what he could still give. One evening, as the two sat by the windowsill where the once tiny sprout had grown into a healthy little plant, Henry turned to Amara. "Do you realize what you've done to me, child?" he asked. Amara tilted her head curiously. "What do you mean?" "You gave me something doctors couldn't give, something money couldn't buy," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me back my heart. You made me alive again." Amara smiled softly, leaning her head against his arm. "No, Mr. Wallace. You had it inside you all along. I just reminded you it was there." Tears welled in Henry's eyes, but they were no longer tears of sorrow. They were tears of peace, of gratitude, of a man who finally understood his purpose. The years went on, and though Henry never walked again, he no longer felt broken. He no longer measured his life by what his legs could or couldn't do. Instead, he measured it by the laughter in his home, the children his foundation fed, and the pride he felt watching Amara grow. And Amara? She carried Henry's lessons with her always. She grew into a strong, intelligent young woman who believed in miracles. Not the kind that made legs walk or diseases vanish, but the kind that changed hearts. Together, their story became a quiet legend in the city. People spoke of the poor black girl who asked only for leftovers and gave a lonely, paralyzed millionaire the greatest gift of all, a reason to live again. And every time someone asked Henry how it all began, he would smile, glance at Amara, and say, "It started with a simple trade. I gave her leftovers, and she gave me a miracle